This question comes up a lot. Of course, when Keffe confessed to you guys, to your task force, about Tupac's murder and that his crew was behind it, people like to say, oh, well, everybody was dead and the car was dead when he'd said that, but that's not true. T. Brown was still alive when Keffe confessed all of this, and was still alive after your book came out. Was still alive for years after that too. I think he was murdered in 2015.
Right.
So what would have happened? People always ask, well, why didn't you go after T. Brown? Then Keffe's just implicated him as the driver, so he's as guilty as everybody else in that car. Yeah. What would have happened? What was the plan for him?
Yeah, so the plan for him was to do the same thing with him that we had done with Keffe. Get him into a corner, into a legal pickle, where we had information that he was dealing dope, even though it was just street level narcotics, in Compton. Because of his history, it could have carried a pretty heavy sentence. And so that was the plan, that was the strategy. So, all right, let's go get T. Brown, do the same thing that we had done with Keffe, get charges against him to where it's in his best interest to tell us what happened. And then I got removed from the task force, right? And after I get removed from the task force, still the objective is other people can go do that. I don't need to go do that. But other people can and go finish the job. But then our administration makes the decision at that point that, hey, give Vegas their case. Focus on biggies. We're going to, shut down this whole two-pronged investigation. And that's what I believe the ball was dropped. I think that was a loose end that could have been capitalized on. And then it wasn't. And so he ends up getting killed sometime later. And now that no longer is available to us to use him to further the case. Because you'd have just played him against Keffe and vice versa. And that's the way it should have happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's...
What do you think about Corey Edwards? Originally Corey Edwards' story back in the 90s after Tupac was killed was that he was at the bar at the MGM. He sees Orlando Anderson right after Orlando Anderson's been beat up by Tupac and the Death Row guys and the Pyrus. And back then he says Orlando didn't seem too upset about it, and then we parted ways. And I didn't see Orlando again for the rest of the night. And then hours later, I heard that Tupac had been shot, right? And then when Brennan went and talked to him, I think you both went and talked to him when you were doing your task force. The story, I think, got closer to the truth, which was he was really mad, and he was talking about getting revenge, and he left with the other guys to go find Tupac and Suge, and then he found out that they'd been shot. And then finally, he went on A&E years ago and talked to Ben Crump on that, who killed Tupac. And then he told the more story that actually lines up with Keffe's story, which was, and then I went with them. I got in the van and we went looking for them, and then, ultimately parted ways.
I was like, man, look, we can catch up with all this when we get back in Compton, And Lane looked at me and said, dog, if it was you, you wouldn't want to wait till we got home. And when he said that, I was like, you right.
Whatever happened in that video was going to be responded to.
Most definitely.
Could he become a witness in this? Obviously, if he doesn't want to, they can't make him. What's his whole?
Yes, so I don't think that we've ever gotten full disclosure out of Corey. I understand that he would be more likely to open up to a civil rights attorney like Crump than he would with law enforcement. And so I get how his circumstances or his predicament kind of evolved from when he's like, man, I just don't want to do with this. And then years go by, and then it's like, well, I'll talk a little bit more about it. And then much more time goes on, and he's more comfortable talking about it. And so some of these alliances that they may have had have fractured over the years. Maybe you're not as loyal to your friends as you were.
Yeah, Keffe hates him by that point. So,
yeah, and so I think Keffe called him a snitch after Russell Poole's book came out. So all of these things kind of lead to opportunities to where guys feel more comfortable telling you what they know. Could he be a witness? Absolutely. He could get called in. Could he take the stand and plead the fifth? Absolutely, he could do that. So I can't really imagine him providing testimony in the court trial.
Right.
But, you know, who knows? Maybe a day comes where he's like, hey, I just got to do the right thing for the right reason. You know, somebody has to be held accountable for what happened.
Right.
We went out and we murdered a guy.
Yeah, and he's not in any legal jeopardy. He wasn't in the Cadillac when it happened.
No.
You know what I mean? There's really nothing that he's going to get in trouble for.
No, in fact, if Keffe is to be believed, he says that that Corey was like, I don't want anything to do with this.
Right.
Like, you know, that he kind of like what do you call ranked out, and that's why they separated ways. That's why Keffe jumped in the Cadillac from the van. Because Corey and maybe others were like, hey, this is not what we came out here to do.
Right. We
came
got
out here to
girls
party,
and
bullshit,
champagne
yeah.
and weed back at the hotels.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.